Jason adjusted the microphone with a shaky hand, trying to keep his voice steady as the soft hum of the amp carried his words through the crisp morning air. A breeze rustled the trees overhead, leaves whispering secrets above the folding chairs neatly arranged beneath the open-sided park shelter. It was supposed to be a peaceful service, simple, respectful, heartfelt, exactly how Greg would have wanted it. Jason took a breath, glancing down at the handwritten cards in his hand. Greg wasn't loud. He began, voice catching slightly, but when he spoke, you listened. He was the kind of man who could say more with a nod than most could in a paragraph. Murmurs of agreement drifted from the dozen or so mourners. A woman dabbed her eyes with a crumpled tissue. An older man shifted on his cane, nodding. It was quiet, reverent. And then came the sirens. At first, they were distant, just background noise, like the occasional bark from a dog or the honk of a passing car. But as Jason continued, describing how Greg once cleared snow from an elderly neighbor's driveway without ever admitting it, the wail grew louder. Too loud. Jason's voice faltered. A few heads turned toward the road bordering the park. Then came the unmistakable flash of red and blue. Two squad cars pulled up in perfect unison, tires crunching on gravel. Doors opened. Officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. Jason blinked, caught between confusion and disbelief. Was someone else in trouble nearby? An accident, maybe. But the officers didn't head toward the street. They walked straight toward him. "Excuse me," one of them called out, addressing the small group. "We've had a complaint about a disturbance, amplified sound in a public space without a permit." Jason stared. What?" From the edge of the crowd, a voice rang out, sharp, cold, and disturbingly familiar. "It's him." Everyone turned. Karen stood beside her black SUV, sunglasses perched like armor on her face. One hand still held her phone. The screen dimmed now. The call clearly ended. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even pretending to. She was smiling. Jason's heart sank. He'd seen that smile once before, when she'd asked him, with trembling lips and tear-glossed eyes, to speak at Greg's memorial. Now, it felt like a trap. "She's the widow," one of the officers clarified gently, gesturing toward her. "She says the noise is excessive, and you don't have a sound permit for this type of event." Jason looked down at the small speaker Greg's cousin had brought. Battery-powered, barely louder than a conversation. Just enough so the elderly guests could hear. "This is a memorial," Jason said slowly. "For her husband. She asked me to speak." Karen folded her arms. "And I didn't ask you to turn it into a spectacle." Greg would have hated this. The tension crackled like static. Guests exchanged glances. A few began murmuring. The emotional hush had shattered, replaced by an eerie, stunned silence. Jason tightened his grip on the mic, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like stone. What was really going on here? It started with a knock on Jason's door exactly 6 days earlier. Sharp, sudden, and way too early for a Saturday morning. He opened it, half expecting a delivery. Instead, there she was, Karen. Her makeup was smudged, lips trembling as if she'd just stopped crying, or wanted it to look like she had. In her hand was a crumpled tissue that she twisted over and over between two fingers like she was wringing the life out of it. "Jason," she said, her voice soft but breathless. I need a favor." He stepped back instinctively, confused. They weren't exactly close. She was polite but stiff whenever they passed each other in the neighborhood. Greg was the warm one, the one who waved first, who offered you tools without asking, who once fixed Jason's porch light without being asked. Jason gestured for her to come in, still not sure what was happening. She didn't. She stayed in the doorway, as if stepping inside his house would make this too real. "The memorial's next Saturday," she said. I just can't get through it. I thought I could, but," she swallowed, eyes blinking rapidly like she was trying to conjure tears. "Greg admired you. He respected you. Would you read something?" A eulogy. I don't care what. Just say something nice. Jason's heart sank. It was an unexpected ask, but he understood. He and Greg had shared late-night fence talks about life, death, and the weirdness in between. If anyone had stories worth sharing, it was him. And if Karen needed help, who was he to say no? I'd be honored, he said gently. Her shoulders dropped, a momentary flicker of relief on her face. But the relief didn't last. Over the next few days, something shifted. Karen became distant. She didn't return his texts. When he emailed a draft of the eulogy to make sure it was okay, there was no reply. Then, 3 days before the service, she sent a single-line message that struck him as odd. Keep it short. No rambling. Don't bring up those donation things. Donation things. Greg had been a quiet supporter of a local homeless shelter Jason volunteered with. In fact, Greg had personally funded a new heater for the place last winter. He'd even asked Jason to help him plan something bigger, a legacy donation. Jason hadn't told anyone, but Greg had been finalizing paperwork the last time they spoke. Why would Karen care about that? He brushed it off as stress. Grief was strange, unpredictable. Maybe she just wanted to keep things simple. Still, the unease lingered. The day of the memorial came fast. Jason arrived early, dressed in black slacks and a tie that Greg once teased him for wearing to a barbecue. He expected Karen to greet guests or offer some kind of opening. But she didn't. She sat alone in her car with the engine running. Her window was rolled down just enough for him to hear the faint buzz of music. Her face was unreadable. She didn't look at him, didn't wave, just stared ahead, hands clenched on the wheel. Jason tightened his grip on the note cards in his pocket. Something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong it was about to get. 2 days before the memorial, Jason stared at his phone, rereading Karen's text for the third time. Keep it short. No rambling. Don't bring up those donation things. It was jarring. The abrupt tone. The phrasing. Like someone giving instructions for a business pitch, not a eulogy. Jason sat in his living room, the note cards spread out in front of him like puzzle pieces. He'd spent hours writing it. Stories that weren't just memories, but pieces of Greg. Like the time Greg fixed an elderly neighbor's mailbox in the pouring rain and didn't say a word about it. Or how he quietly paid off a struggling family's overdue electric bill and told Jason, "Some things you do just to remind the world it hasn't gone completely dark." Jason could still hear him saying that. Now Karen didn't want any of it mentioned. He typed out a careful reply. These stories show who Greg really was. You sure? The message went unread for nearly a full day. When she finally responded, it was just 2 words. Stay focused. Jason stared at it. Stay focused. On what? His gut twisted. Something didn't sit right. He was being asked to honor a man who believed in quiet goodness, but was being told to strip that goodness out of the story. He thought of reaching out to someone else. Maybe Greg's sister, whom he'd met a few times. But Greg's family was distant, scattered across the country. Karen had taken charge of the arrangements. She'd insisted on a private ceremony at the small park near the lake, not at the church where Greg occasionally volunteered. Fewer people, she said. More intimate. But Jason was starting to think it wasn't about intimacy, it was about control. Still, the day arrived. The sky was unusually clear for early spring, blue and cloudless, the kind of weather that makes a memorial feel painfully serene. Chairs were arranged in neat rows under the pavilion, and a small battery-powered speaker sat on the table next to a framed photo of Greg, smiling in his old fishing hat. Jason showed up 30 minutes early, hoping to connect with Karen, to go over last-minute details, or at least get a read on her mood. But she wasn't at the pavilion. She was parked 50 feet away, engine idling, sunglasses on, watching him, watching everything. He gave a small wave. She didn't respond. 15 minutes passed. People arrived slowly, neighbors, a few coworkers, a friend from the community center. Jason noticed the gaps. The emptiness. He'd expected more. He checked his notes again. His hands were dry, but he felt sweat beading along the back of his neck. Still no word from Karen. No signal to begin. Just a silent engine, tinted windows, and her face, stone still behind her sunglasses. Finally, a soft voice said, "You can start whenever." It was Greg's cousin, an older woman with kind eyes. She gestured gently to the mic. Jason stepped forward, heart heavy but steady. If Karen wasn't going to speak, he would. He opened the eulogy with a story, a kind Greg would have chuckled at. And the moment he did, Karen opened her car door, stepped out, and made a phone call. Jason saw her mouth the words, "Yes, now." He kept reading, but a chill gripped him. Something was coming. Jason's voice echoed gently through the park as he read, his words rolling like waves across the rows of silent guests. The air was still. Birds chirped in the trees overhead, a strange contrast to the solemn tone of the memorial. "Greg once told me," Jason said into the mic, "that the best thing you could do in life was leave behind a quieter world than you came into, not because you didn't matter, but because you helped calm the storm for someone else." There was a faint sniffle from the second row. Someone nodded slowly. A couple held hands. But then Jason saw it, just out of the corner of his eye. Karen, pacing near her SUV, phone to her ear. Not crying, not listening, talking, directing, and smiling. He blinked. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe she was just nervous. Grief looked strange on different people. He tried to shake it off, focusing back on the story. He flipped to the next note card. This was Greg in a nutshell. He answered. Wee-oo, wee-oo. The sirens cut through the moment like a knife through silk. Jason froze mid-sentence, his heart lurching as the unmistakable wail of police sirens swelled. Guests turned toward the road, eyebrows raised, lips parting. A minute later, 2 patrol cars rolled up like something out of a surreal painting. Clean, deliberate, lights spinning silently before the whoop of the final siren cut out. Jason's voice trailed off. No one moved. Doors slammed. 2 officers stepped out, one tall and broad, the other scanning the crowd with a practiced wariness. The taller one raised a hand, polite but firm. "Folks, we received a call about a disturbance, reports of an unauthorized amplified event." Jason stood there, not understanding. At what? The officer's gaze settled on the small speaker. Noise complaint, he clarified. Apparently, there's no permit filed for a sound system in this park. Gasps rippled through the guests. The old man with the cane muttered, "What the hell?" And then, like a knife in the back, her voice rang out. "It's him," Karen called from the sidelines, pointing directly at Jason. "He's the one making the disturbance." Jason turned, slow and stunned. Karen stood with one hand still on her phone, the other on her hip, her eyes cold as stone. "He wasn't authorized to do this," she said. "I asked him to say a few words, not set up a whole production." Jason's mind reeled. Production. He stared at the modest speaker, the folding chairs, the mourners still clutching tissues. This wasn't a concert. This wasn't a protest. It was Greg's memorial. And she had called the police. "Ma'am," the officer said, now more cautious, "was this man invited to speak?" Karen hesitated for a heartbeat, just long enough to notice. "I didn't approve this," she said, each word chosen like a weapon. "This performance." Jason's heart thundered. He wanted to speak, to explain, but he couldn't find the words. Around him, guests looked on, confused, unsettled, silent. That's when it hit him. This wasn't about noise or permits. This was something else. And Karen wasn't grieving. She was hiding. The funeral had turned into a crime scene. Or at least, that's how it felt to Jason as the officers asked him to step aside. He couldn't hear the wind anymore, couldn't hear the birds. All he could hear was the rising murmur of shocked voices behind him and the heavy thud of his own heartbeat. Karen stood just beyond the yellowing grass, arms crossed, sunglasses still on, lips pursed like a judge waiting for the sentence to be read. "This is a misunderstanding," Jason said to the officers, keeping his tone even. "I was asked to speak at this memorial. I was invited by her, Karen." One of the officers glanced back at her. "Ma'am, is that true?" Karen paused, just long enough to twist the moment like a knife. "I asked him to say a few words," she replied, voice trembling just enough to sound credible. "But when I got here, he'd set up equipment, started inviting people I didn't even know." It felt exploitative. Gasps rippled through the mourners. One woman stood up abruptly, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "That's not true," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "He didn't even speak about himself. He was honoring Greg. Beautifully." Another man chimed in. "We were neighbors for 20 years. Jason and Greg were close. Closer than anyone here. You sat in your car the whole time." The officer hesitated. Jason glanced at Karen. Her mask didn't falter, but her eyes flickered, just for a second. Something about the shift in the crowd was making her nervous. And then, like a thunderclap, another voice cut in. "Wait, wasn't Greg planning something with Jason? A donation or some kind of fund?" It came from the back row. An older woman in a wide-brimmed hat. Jason didn't even know her name, but she remembered. Karen's posture changed, shoulders tightening, chin rising like a cobra preparing to strike. "There was something," the woman continued. "Greg mentioned it at bridge night. Something about making a legacy gift. A 40. She trailed off. Now everyone was looking at Karen. Jason locked eyes with her. Her expression was no longer just cold, it was calculated. And something else. Threatened. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly. "Greg never mentioned anything like that to me. And even if he had, what business is it of yours?" She turned to Jason, venom coating her voice. "You think reading a few stories makes you important. You think this little performance makes you some kind of saint." Jason stepped forward slowly, his voice low, steady. "I think Greg knew who he could trust, and who he couldn't." That landed. Hard. The crowd was silent now. Even the officers had stopped asking questions. Karen's hands trembled. Barely, but Jason saw it. The pressure was cracking her shell. And then she snapped. "You think you know everything," she hissed. "You think he told you the truth. You don't know what he was planning. You don't know why he died." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jason froze. The crowd collectively inhaled. Why he died? What did that mean? For the first time, the police didn't look confused. They looked interested. The memorial ended not with a prayer, but with a police report. Karen stormed off before the officers could ask more questions, sunglasses hiding whatever flickered behind her eyes. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even look back. Jason stood among scattered folding chairs and half-finished condolences, his mind spiraling. "You don't know why he died." The words clung to him like smoke, impossible to shake. He'd seen Greg just days before the accident, healthy, laughing, making plans. And then suddenly, a heart attack. No pre-existing conditions, no warning signs, no autopsy. Karen had declined it. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He sat in his living room, with Greg's note card still in his hands, the eulogy incomplete, a story half told. On a hunch, he reached for his laptop. Greg had once shared access to a shared Google Drive folder where they brainstormed fundraising ideas. Jason hadn't opened it in months. The password still worked. Inside the folder, everything was where they'd left it. Budgets, proposals, a few grant templates. But at the bottom of the file list was a document Jason didn't recognize. Private-legacy-draft.docs. His stomach dropped. He opened it. The document was half-written, more a letter than a legal file. It was Greg's voice, unmistakable, in every word. If you're reading this, Karen already knows. I haven't told her everything. She never supported the shelter, said it was a waste. But I decided to leave the bulk of my estate to the organization, through Jason, because I trust him more than anyone. Jason leaned back slowly, heart pounding. The file had a timestamp. 2 days before Greg died. There was more. Notes scribbled in the margin. We'll update at bank tomorrow. Legal review Monday. Jason, tell him after. Greg never got that chance. And Karen, she'd never mentioned any of this. Jason clicked open the drive's activity tab. Another chill hit him. The file had been opened again. Yesterday. By Karen's Gmail account. She knew. She had known all along. He sat frozen in the dark, trying to breathe. The text echoed in his mind like a whisper through a tunnel. You don't know why he died. Did she? Jason didn't want to believe it. But something had always felt off. Her icy grief, her insistence on silence, the frantic 911 call over a tiny speaker, and now, a secret will Greg never had the chance to sign. He picked up his phone, fingers trembling. He called the shelter's director, Elaine, a woman who knew Greg too, someone who could verify the conversations they'd all had. When she answered, Jason wasted no time. Did Greg ever talk to you about a donation? Something long-term, like a bequest? There was silence on the other end. Then, yes, just last week. He asked me to help him find a lawyer. Jason's throat went dry. I think someone stopped him, he whispered. I think someone made sure he never signed it. Elaine's voice dropped. You're saying? I don't know, Jason said, but I need to find out. He stared at his screen, the document still open. And that's when he noticed something buried in the metadata. An autosave location. Greg's external hard drive. If it still existed, the rest of the truth might be on it. The next morning, Jason stood outside Greg and Karen's house, now technically just Karen's, staring up at the shutters drawn tightly over the windows like eyelids in denial. He shouldn't have come. He knew that. But he also knew something else. Greg had once told him where he kept the real stuff. Bottom drawer in the study desk, Greg had whispered during one of their late-night backyard talks. Locked. Only I know the trick. Press the middle of the handle. Pops open like a charm. Karen never figured it out. Jason had laughed back then. Now it felt like a prophecy. He rang the doorbell once. Twice. No answer. He tried calling Karen. Voicemail. He walked around the side of the house. The gate creaked open with a push. He didn't feel like a trespasser. He felt like a man digging up a truth someone had tried very hard to bury. The study window was slightly cracked, probably for airflow. Typical Greg. Jason slipped his fingers in and pushed it open. Climbed through with a grunt. His shoes hit the carpet silently. Everything looked exactly as Greg had left it, except for the desk. The drawers were pulled halfway open, as if someone had searched through them, fast and carelessly. The bottom drawer was shut tight. Jason crouched, his heartbeat in his ears. He pressed the center of the drawer's handle. Click. It slid open smoothly. Inside was a sleek black external hard drive, wrapped in a soft cloth. A flash drive. A small notebook, spiral-bound, worn at the corners. Jason grabbed everything, heart thudding like a war drum. But then, his breath caught. The front door slammed. Footsteps. Heavy. Familiar. Karen's voice echoed from the hallway. I knew it. Jason froze, still kneeling by the drawer. You really couldn't help yourself, could you? She said coldly, stepping into the study. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was calm. And that terrified him. You already had the words, Jason. The stories. The friends, she said, stepping closer. But you had to have his legacy, too. Jason stood slowly, clutching the hard drive to his chest. I know what he was planning. I saw the file. He wanted to help people. You wanted it buried. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. He wanted a legacy. He's got one now. A nice, clean one. Quiet, respectful. Mine. Jason took a step back toward the window. You never wanted people to know what he stood for, because then they'd ask questions. He was going to leave me with nothing. She hissed, the mask slipping. 40 years together, and he decides to play hero at the end. He forgot who built this life, who kept it standing. Jason didn't move. She reached into her purse, slow, smooth. He didn't wait to find out what came next. He turned and dived through the window, rolling onto the grass outside. Pain flared in his shoulder, but he kept running, hard drive clutched like a lifeline. Behind him, Karen screamed something unintelligible. But Jason wasn't listening. He had what he came for. Now all that mattered was what was on it, and who was willing to kill to keep it hidden. Jason didn't stop running until he reached his car, the key shaking in his hand as he fumbled to unlock the door. The external hard drive was like a live wire in his palm, humming with a promise of truth and danger. His hands trembled as he shoved the drive into the passenger seat. The faint sound of Karen's voice, cutting through the still air, echoed in his ears. The desire to look over his shoulder, to make sure she wasn't following, clawed at him, but he knew better. No time. His engine roared to life, and he sped out of the driveway, tires screeching on the asphalt. The drive to his apartment felt like it took years. He was hyper-aware of every turn, every red light, every person who seemed to cross his path. Karen was a shadow in the rearview mirror, but he couldn't let himself look back. At last, he pulled into his garage, locked the doors behind him, and took the hard drive inside. The tension in his chest was unbearable, but there was no turning back now. He set it down carefully on the kitchen counter, eyes fixed on it, as if it were a bomb ready to explode. He fired up his laptop. The hard drive clicked to life as the folders loaded. Jason's fingers hovered above the keyboard, the weight of what was about to unfold settling in. This was it, the truth. The first document he opened was an encrypted file titled Final Legacy Revision. His heart hammered as he cracked the password. Greg found me. A file opened in front of him, Greg's familiar voice leaping off the screen. Karen never wanted anyone to know who I really was. The Greg you know, the one she married, the one she claimed to love, isn't the full story. I didn't want her to know this, but I knew there'd come a time when the truth had to come out. She's the reason I'm writing this, the reason I'm afraid. Jason's stomach churned. He scanned the file quickly, words twisting like a rope tightening around his neck. Greg had been secretly siphoning funds from his business for years. Small amounts, hidden inside accounts. But the money wasn't for him. It was for the people who needed it. The homeless shelters, the orphans, the refugees. Karen had known. Karen had helped him cover it up. Because if Greg's true charitable legacy ever came out, it would destroy her entire empire. Greg's wealth, his reputation, had been built on the sacrifice of others. And she had buried it, forced him to stop, told him to choose her or the mission. And then, when Greg started to make plans to give it all away, to leave a legacy that would actually help people, Karen had made sure he never saw that final day. Jason's blood ran cold. The next file contained something even more horrifying. I'm sorry, Jason. I never thought it would go this far. But Karen, she wasn't just the woman I married. She was part of something darker. I don't know who she's connected to, but I know she's not who she says she is. Be careful. If anything happens to me, look at her lawyer, look at the ones she trusts, and follow the money. Jason's hands shook as he read the final words, as though they were written for him, written for this exact moment. There it was, the truth, and it wasn't just about Greg. It was about Karen, her cold, calculated pursuit of power, her ties to the people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Jason's head snapped up, his breath caught. He didn't need to look through the peephole. He knew who it was. He knew what she wanted. And he knew, for the first time, that the game was just beginning.